world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Saturday, November 1st, as you are listening to this. We're at the beginning of another month, and there's a lot to talk about. There always seems to be a lot to talk about, especially with this administration. Now, the big thing looming over everybody right now is this government shutdown. This is day 32 of the government shutdown. There does not appear to be an end in sight. There doesn't appear to be anything changing. Nothing happened yesterday as far as coming to any sort of a deal. I didn't see anything about any negotiations. The Senate wasn't in session. And while things are going horribly, Republicans are not winning the messaging fight. Now, they believe they are. They genuinely believe they have convinced the American people they are winning the messaging fight over the government shutdown. They believe 100% that they are in the right and that the American people would agree with them. However, I think the majority of Americans disagree with that stance. I think Republicans are going to be surprised when it comes to Tuesday's elections, where you have city and local elections, you have some major statewide races, including the governor of New Jersey, the governor of Virginia, and Prop 50 in California to redraw the congressional maps to offset the 5 seats that Texas has drawn out already. Now, why do I think they are going to get surprised? Because they expect to win those elections, I believe. I think they genuinely think they are going to win, or at least be extremely competitive. And I think they're going to get blown out because of all of the things going on. And voters are mad, so they are going to be turning against the Republican Party. Now, we are going to have to watch, and if the trend starts going for even mayor and mayoral and city council races, et cetera, the news media may pick up on it, and we may start hearing that, hey, this town or that town, and maybe you only hear about it in your state versus, and it makes state news versus something that normally wouldn't get talked about, is if, long-standing Republican areas flip. Okay. So we have those elections coming up. We have the government shut down, and people are pissed at Republicans over the shutdown. Now, there has been nothing happening. Now, I have yet to hear if Mike Johnson is going to keep the House of Representatives out next week as well. They have not been in session since late September. They took the entirety of the month of October off. And it is in part because he is trying to keep Representative Grijalva out of the House of Representatives. She has won her election. She has been a sitting member of Congress, or should be a sitting member of Congress, going back over a month now, well over a month. But he refuses to swear her in, and he gives varying reasons as to why not. First, he tries to say, well, she needed to have the paperwork in, and then said, well, we have to be in full session. Neither of those things are true. Then tried to say, well, we shouldn't do it. It's not proper to do it when the government is shut down. Again, not true. And then he blamed Nancy Pelosi because Pelosi did it to held out for somebody else to get sworn in. But when Nancy Pelosi did it, it was because they were already out on recess and they weren't coming back. It was during their typical August 6-week recess that they do anyway. That's different than this. This was a time where they were scheduled to be in session. They were scheduled to do work, and Mike Johnson had canceled the votes and was refusing to swear in this representative, Representative Grijalva. Now, why is he completely refusing? Well, because of the Epstein files. There is a discharge petition sitting in the House of Representatives. You need 218 votes to bring a discharge petition which forces a vote around the will of the Speaker of the House and majority leadership. This is one of the ways a minority party or a fraction group of the majority party's own party can bring something that the speaker and the leader does not, then the leadership of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, even for that matter, can bring to the floor and force the House to vote on it. Now, they do not want to vote on the Epstein files. Why? Because it would be politically disastrous. Okay? They can't win this scenario. If they vote to release the Epstein files, Donald Trump has already said any Republican that votes to release the files, any Republican that signs the discharge petition, is hostile to the president. Now, why would he say that? Because he's in the files. I usually say probably, but he is in the files. If we're being honest, there's no way with those kind of reactions that he would not be in the files. Or if he's not in there, his donors, his friends, maybe other people in his administration, people he is connected with closely, are in the files. People he is trying to protect. Okay, so Donald Trump says you'd be hostile to this administration if you vote to release the Epstein files. Well, the voters, the Republican voters, want the Epstein files released. So the MAGA politician votes to keep them hidden, to keep Donald Trump happy. They have to go back to their district and face their voters and go, yeah, well, I've seen them. It wasn't really that big of a deal. We don't need to release the Epstein files. Problem with that, voters are going to be pissed off and potentially not vote for that politician again or vote for a primary challenger or something like that. But if they vote against Donald Trump and vote to release the files, their voters are going to be happy. All right. But Donald Trump isn't. He could potentially try to primary out these people, bring in all sorts of primary challengers, etc., and make it so that they are no longer in the House of Representatives. Now, why would they do that? Or how could he do that? Well, he's done it before. He did it to Liz Cheney because she had the nerve to sit on the J6 committee, and she sat there and looked at the evidence and said, yeah, Donald Trump was responsible for January 6th. And Donald Trump didn't like that. He helped get a primary challenger toward her, and she was gone. She was no longer in the House of Representatives. So these Republican lawmakers, they can't do anything with it. So what do? Well, Mike Johnson's solution is, we'll just not be around. We'll just keep the House closed. Now, his other strategy is saying he is putting pressure on Democrats to fund the government. Problem is, we've been going on over a month now where you've done that. It hasn't worked. Democrats continue to say, fuck you, and nothing changes. So is it really worth it? Why not bring the House back, actually have negotiations, and we can talk about the problems that are out there? But they don't want to do that. Now, depending on how these elections go Tuesday night, if it's a landslide for the Democrats, like I think it could be, the few statewide races, et cetera, where they can get a snapshot view of what people are thinking, it may bring Republicans to the table. We'll have to see, and we'll talk about that, as we get into next week. But if they were serious about negotiating, I've said it before, I'll say it again. If they were serious about negotiating, they would be there negotiating. Democrats have said what they want. They have started the volley of negotiating. They said, we want to restore the almost $1 trillion you guys took from Medicaid in the one big beautiful bill, and we want a return or an extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies that expire at the end of the year. And so far, Republicans are saying, no, we don't want that. You're going to pass the thing we want. We're not negotiating. They are throwing a temper tantrum like a little toddler. Now, I know Republicans and MAGAs particularly are going to be looking at it saying that it's the Democrats who are doing just that. But they're not, in part for two reasons. One, the clean CR that the Democrats passed in March was keeping things funded at the Joe Biden presidency levels, right? Republicans agreed in good faith to do that. They needed Democratic support to pass it. Democrats said, okay, but we want to have a discussion about the Affordable Care Act subsidies. We need to extend them. We need to talk about it. They expire at the end of the year. Republicans said, okay, we'll do that. Now, between there and here, they also passed the One Big Beautiful Bill with no Democratic support, which cut a bunch of money from Medicaid, from food stamps, changed work requirements for Medicaid and food stamps, and did all of these things. Well, Democrats are saying, hey, we agreed back in March for you to fund things at this level till September, and then you reneged on that, and you went back on your deal. Why would we negotiate with you? Why would we accept good faith at this point and say, okay, well, we're just going to fund it at the new levels? See, Republicans want Democrats to accept the new levels they passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill, in part so that way when it goes sideways and it fucks shit up, they can blame the Democrats. Now, as far as the negotiating, I think ultimately they will come to some kind of a deal, and I think ultimately the Republicans back down. And I thought one of the things that might bring them to the negotiating table was today, the first, with SNAP benefits. Food SNAP benefits were not set to go out today. But Donald Trump said, don't have any way to do it. We don't have any appropriations. There's no money. The well's dry. That's what him and his administration are saying. Except there's an emergency fund in the USDA where that is supposed to cover situations like this where there is a government shutdown. So they can kick out some of the funding, maybe 2 weeks of funding or something, because most government shutdowns, now this is an exception, it has gone on over a month, are solved in less than a week. The emergency fund is there so that they can pay out a week or two worth of SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits, to everybody in the country. And then they turn around and say, okay, we've paid out the food stamp benefits for 2 weeks. We'll pay the rest when we open the government. In between, Congress has negotiated. They've gotten past whatever impasse they have, and they turn around and open the government, and there's appropriations and funding to fund the rest of the month that they were in if there was a lapse in food stamp funding and SNAP funding. In fact, Donald Trump did it during his first term. During that 35-day shutdown during Donald Trump's first term, that lasted over into January of, what would that have been, 2019? It lasted long enough that the new Congress was sworn in. Now, when that happened, government was shut down. They swore in all 435 new members of the House of Representatives, and a new Congress took over negotiating where the previous one failed, and then they ultimately funded the government. And in fact, that was when Democrats had control of the House of Representatives, and it took Democrats to dig the Republicans out of the mess and get the government back open. So when it comes down to it, they are going to ultimately have to negotiate and open the government. But today, with these food stamp benefits, with SNAP benefits, Donald Trump was saying they don't have the money, they don't have any authority to issue the payment. But that's just not true. Like I said, in fact, they did that during Donald Trump's first term. Now, Mike Johnson even says there's no money there. There's no money in the emergency fund. Well, haven't seen any news stories. Haven't seen anybody talking about it from this administration. There hasn't been a natural disaster big enough to warrant spending the entirety of the emergency fund that I've seen. Um, there have been natural disasters and they have covered some things through FEMA aid and things like that, but I haven't seen anything where they talked about releasing extra food stamp money to cover this natural disaster, anything like that. So the food stamp emergency fund should be there. But Mike Johnson's saying it's not. Well, that leads to an interesting question. Is it possible? And I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist here. If you followed me for a while, I deal typically in reality. I deal in facts. I look at the way things are, and I don't like jumping down conspiracy theory rabbit holes. But it makes you wonder if if there's something wrong, right? Donald Trump has been finding ways to shuffle money around, do things that he wasn't supposed to do. He talks about sending money to Argentina, but there was no congressional appropriations for money to Argentina, all of this stuff. So it makes you wonder, did he look at it and say, well, we got that emergency fund for the USDA that hasn't been touched in, however long. Well, maybe I'm just going to touch it. I'm going to take from it to pay this other thing over here. Nobody will know the difference. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. Given this administration's propensity to lie and the fact that they're not forthcoming with data and information. And in fact, when the data doesn't make Donald Trump look good, like what they did with the head of Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they fire the person. So Donald Trump doesn't want good data coming out anyway. So that leads us to where we are, asking the question of, could the money just be gone and there is no funds in the emergency coffers to release for SNAP? Now, Donald Trump got bad news when it comes to SNAP benefits yesterday. Two separate judges, one in Rhode Island, one in Boston, I believe, issued rulings. One was a temporary restraining order. The other was an actual ruling, the way I understand it, and I don't remember which judge was which, where they are forced to pay November's food stamp money, November's SNAP money out with the emergency fund. Now, Donald Trump took to Truth Social to decry this ruling, and of course, he's playing the victim a little bit with this ruling and trying to also play the hero. Now, he himself before had said they were not going to release the emergency funds. He keeps saying they don't have the legal authority, but they do, and they did during his last term. Now, he probably doesn't remember. We've talked a lot about his dementia problems and his memory problems, etc. So he may not remember what they did during his first term. And he's got somebody around him now who doesn't know what they're doing because most of his advisors are incompetent, are telling him, yeah, you can't really do that. So he believes it. So now we have this problem. But he takes to Truth Social, and of course he says, our attorneys say we don't have the legal authority to fund SNAP because there's been no appropriations from Congress. Okay, first problem. There were appropriations. Congress appropriated money. They agreed to put money into that emergency fund. That is appropriations. So wrong right off the bat. But he says there's been no appropriation from Congress and that Congress must do it. And then he goes on to say that, well, he would love to pay it out, but again, he's blaming the Democrats for their shutdown. That he wants to fund the food stamp program. Really, you want to fund it? Then why, in your one big beautiful bill, did you cut funding to the food stamp program? Why have Republicans cut funding to the food stamp program? Why have Republicans in the Senate shot down two different bills that were aimed to fund the SNAP program through the government shutdown? But Donald Trump believes Republicans want to do it, that they don't want to hurt people. So he's lying there too. But then he tries to say that there are conflicting rulings from the two judges. Well, there is a little bit of a conflict, but not the way Donald Trump would make you believe. He makes it sound like it's some major conflicting ruling, like one judge said they had to pay it, one judge said no, you don't. That's not what happened. One judge issued a temporary restraining order saying that they couldn't just block the food stamp money and they had to try to release the funds. The other judge said they must fund the food stamp program using the emergency fund and try to make any other necessary arrangements to keep it funded that they have, at hand. Now, of course, Donald Trump says he is filing, asking for clarification, and once he gets the clarification, he's going to release the money. Well, we'll see, because it's a weekend. Nothing may happen till Monday at the earliest. As of recording this, I have not heard anything about guaranteeing that the money is going out. But may only be out for a couple of days, and that wouldn't, while it would, some people would really suffer, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. If they can get it figured out by Monday, you can, hopefully survive through the weekend at least, versus not knowing when it was going to come back. And Donald Trump in this administration were even trying to say that they didn't have to back pay November's food stamp money, November SNAP money, if the government didn't open back up, or when it did, that they didn't have to. That they could say, well, we were closed for all of 3 weeks in November or whatever, so we're only going to pay you for the last week, or we don't have to pay you for any of November, and well, you'll just get your normal disbursement on on December, which that wouldn't fly either. But again, Donald Trump claims to be the one that wants to make sure people can get fed. Now, why is he saying that? Because he wants to sound like the hero. He wants to sound like the big winner. Donald Trump is only cares about his perception, or the perception of him, his attitude. He's created a problem, and now he comes out like the guy who can solve that problem. Well, Donnie, you could solve the problem. How about you call your congressional Republicans, instead of telling them to force the Democrats to agree to your will, maybe negotiate. I thought you were the master negotiator. I thought you knew everything about deal making, and nobody made better deals than you. But see, he doesn't do that. Instead, he bullies, and now he's getting pushback, and he doesn't understand. He's never gotten pushback like this in his life. His political capital is spent, and he doesn't realize it yet. The midterms are fast approaching. He has screwed up this country to the point where there's going to be a reckoning in the midterms. And when it happens, after the midterms, when Donald Trump, if he even loses the House by 1 seat, which is more than possible, his second half of his term, he's done. He will get nothing done, and he will not be able to pass anything legislatively. He will need to work with Democrats and negotiate, and they would prevent him from doing any of the most crazy bullshit. And the guardrails would be back in place. Now, Donald Trump is terrified of that outcome because he thinks he would get impeached. And there's a good chance, in my mind, I think there is a better chance than ever before, if Donald Trump gets impeached at any point after the midterms, even before the midterms, because Republicans would have to do it. But even after the midterms, there is a chance that Republicans go right along and say, yeah, we're going to get rid of him. We're going to go with J.D. Vance, and we're going to try to clean up our image going into 2028. Make things better, or at least give it the appearance that we're trying to make things better. We've gotten all we can from Donald Trump. He can't run for re-election. And, we need to clean up our image. Now, as far as running for re-election, Donald Trump would have you believe that he can run for a third term. Now, he called this idea too cute. We talked about this when he was on his Asia trip. that he could potentially run as somebody's vice president, and then that person resigns and he becomes president. Well, there's multiple problems with that philosophy. First of all, it was probably thought up by the likes of Steve Bannon, who is by no means a genius. Um, but it's all about giving Donald Trump the perception that he can stay in power. Okay, he cares about power. He thinks by staying in power, he can stay out of prison. And he knows, or I'm assuming, no, that either he knows or is presuming that when he gets out, he is going to be facing some versions of criminal liability for his actions. So, with that being said, he wants to run for a third term. So, this idea that he runs as J.D. Vance's VP and that somehow J.D. Vance would then be able to resign almost immediately and give Donald Trump a third term, there's multiple problems with that. Like I said, first was the fact that it was probably thought up by Steve Bannon. But then you go deeper. Okay, 22nd Amendment clearly says no person may be elected to the office of president more than twice. If you are the VP or someone else who has assumed the roles of the president, then you have a max of 10 years. So even if it were possible for this to all happen, at best, Donald Trump would get 2 years, not a full third term. At best. But then, if you look a little deeper, there's the 12th Amendment. 12th Amendment says if you are ineligible to run for the presidency, you are ineligible to run for the vice presidency. So, gee, Donald Trump has had 2 terms of his own. That makes him ineligible to run for president. He can't be elected. So if he can't be elected president by the 12th Amendment, he also cannot be elected vice president. And the other dumbass way that people are saying, well, he could become president again, would be if some bullshit happens, and again, I don't think Republicans end up winning in 28. I think it ends up being a Democrat. But if by some miracle J.D. Vance wins in 28, that the Republicans have the House of Representatives. Again, don't think that's going to happen, but assuming it does, for the sake of this scenario, this magic scenario that they've deluded themselves into believing, is that J.D. Vance would get elected with his own VP, assuming Marco Rubio, or somebody like that. That J.D. Vance resigns almost immediately after becoming president. Marco Rubio resigns. And what about Donald Trump? How does he fit in the scenario? That because Republicans have the House of Representatives, they would vote in Donald Trump as Speaker of the House. This is the same bullshit we heard going into 2022 when Republicans got control of the House of Representatives during Joe Biden's term. There were people saying, oh, look, the Republicans are going to vote in Donald Trump as Speaker of the House. And there was some bullshit, half-assed attempt. I think he got like 10, 12, 15 votes, some bullshit like that. It was a token gesture at best when they couldn't agree to get Kevin McCarthy. And they knew they weren't going to have the votes to get Kevin McCarthy. But it wasn't serious by any means. They have never in 240 years or whatever, because our Congress is not as old as the Declaration of Independence. But in like 240 years or whatever, they have never once elected a Speaker of the House that was not a member of the House of Representatives. So to say that Republicans are going to win the presidency, the vice presidency, win the House of Representatives, and then both of their candidates who ran on and were assuming to run or that would be fulfilling the job of president and vice president would immediately resign in favor of Trump, again, is stupid. This is weird bullshit that is feeding the cult because they know if the cult believes Donald Trump is gone, then they're not going to be as interested in politics. So we have we don't even have to really deal with it. Just keep from buying into the bullshit. Donald Trump is not going to be around in the political climate for 2028. Now he's probably going to have his thumb on the scale if he's alive for 2028 and trying to determine who ends up um, being the Republican nominee. Now, it's way too early for either party to start talking about who their nominee is going to be. Way too early. That's why I think Gavin Newsom is probably going to be out as the front runner for the Democratic Party. It's too early. People are already talking about how he's a lock for 2028. I think he's done. Realistically, only one person has ever came out and said they were running this early and it actually gotten the nomination and then become president that I'm aware of, and that was Donald Trump. Because prior to Donald Trump, you didn't launch a presidential campaign ahead of the midterm elections. You didn't do it. Why did Donald Trump? Because he was facing legal jeopardy. He was worried about all of the things, all of the investigations and the charges and everything. And he thought, and apparently he was right, because the courts slow walked everything and they took their sweet time dealing with him, that he thought by being a presidential candidate, he would somehow have some kind of protection from being prosecuted, some kind of an immunity. Now, ultimately, the Supreme Court said presidents do have an immunity of sorts for their roles in fulfilling the job in the office of the president. Now, that immunity ruling only applies to the things the president does that are part of the job and are not crimes. Now, if there are crimes involved, and I don't know how this is going to work, like with the remodeling of the White House. He tore down the East Wing, didn't get permission from any of the bodies he was supposed to go to, didn't get any approval for funding from Congress. And again, we were just talking about funding and appropriations. When it comes to this SNAP payment, right? The SNAP emergency fund. We were saying, is the money even there? Or did it disappear? Well, did they maybe tap into that to help fund these renovations at the White House and the tearing down of the East Wing? Donald Trump would have you believe that it's all private donations and privately funded. But here's the problem with that. Donald Trump does not own the White House. He is a guest. He is a permanent resident guest. Well, permanent till the end of his term anyway. But he is a guest. He is not the property owner. This is not one of his trashy resorts. He does not get to do, he should not get to do a lot of what he has already done. Now, ultimately, there are going to be congressional investigations. There's going to probably be criminal investigations when Donald Trump is gone. Do I think the DOJ is going to do anything right now? No. Why? Because Pam Bondi's the head of the DOJ. Department of Justice isn't going to do anything. They're going to sit back and they're going to wait, and they are going to just say, okay, Donald Trump doesn't want anybody prosecuted over this. They would probably not even investigate it and move on. Nothing to see here. But ultimately, Donald Trump is going to be gone. Now, I think the dementia and I think the other factors come and they get a hold of him. And I don't think he makes it to the end of his term. We talk about it a lot, but he's getting worse. We see it, more and more with how he appears, his ankles. He looks lost a lot more. His face droops after he's been, out and about. He is having problems. It's apparent. And he talks about taking cognitive assessments at Walter Reed. Now, he has actually said they were difficult. I'm sorry, if the Montreal Cognitive Assessment is difficult and you are the sitting president, that is a major red flag and a major problem. But see, he doesn't realize that. Donald Trump isn't smart enough to understand that him saying that he's struggling with the Montreal Cognitive Assessment is a problem. He thinks it's an aptitude and an IQ test, and he thinks it's a flex to say how well he did. Donald Trump is compromised, both in the fact that he is easily manipulated, always has been, but even more so now in his diminished capacity, that they're getting him to say and do things that he normally wouldn't do. Just because they can tell him whatever, and he's going to go, yeah, okay. He doesn't look deeper. He never looked deeper into things beforehand. He didn't have a real deep understanding of how the presidency worked last time. The only difference was he had halfway competent people around him in order to protect him. But all of those competent people, they've seen what happens to Donald Trump's associates. They end up fired. They end up indicted. He turns on them. They have to resign in disgrace, something like that. Or, in the case of his former vice president, Mike Pence, he sent his mouth-breathing MAGA faithful to the Capitol to try to prevent them from certifying an election that Joe Biden won, to make Joe Biden the incoming president. And the crowd was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Why would you want to be associated with that if you're of the right mind? But the people around him that are like RFK Jr., they want to be around him because they get into politics. They get the levers of power. They get to make decisions about things. All right? And they're using Donald Trump to make it happen. He's a useful idiot who has clearly having some cognitive and mental problems. And he is so out of touch with what is going on, it's not funny. Now, we've been talking about this government shutdown. Well, Donald Trump's not doing any negotiating about the government shutdown. None. Where is he right now? Well, he was down at Mar-a-Lago. He threw himself a Halloween party. Okay. Now, I haven't seen a whole lot about this Halloween party, but I'm guessing if it's like a typical Donald Trump thing, it was probably donors and big money. Maybe I'll be surprised, but Donald Trump went back to his own golf resort so he can go play golf, and he threw himself a Halloween party. And this is coming on the days when he is trying to tell the courts that despite their reading of how the statute works, he knows more than they do, and he can't really release the funds. And it doesn't matter. Well, and that people can't eat. We have people in this country, 41, 43 million, something like that are not going to have access to food stamps this month, right now. Now, I said the courts have said he has to issue that payment, and he does, but he's trying to still drag his feet over it. Okay. And all while that's going on, he's down at Mar-a-Lago. He's partying it up. He's having a good time. As there are people in this country trying to figure out, okay, we stretched our budget all the way to the first, expecting our next month of food stamps. What ingredients do we have left in the pantry? How can we stretch what little we have left to for as many days as it takes Donald Trump to actually comply with the court order? So this whole thing, Donald Trump just appears, in my mind, out of touch. He's partying, he's having a good time, but he should be in Washington. He should be leading the negotiations, but they're not. He's not there. He's abdicating. Now, he's not truly abdicating power, because if he did, we'd have President Vance. And while Vance may have more evil intentions than Donald Trump, he at least would listen to advisors, wouldn't make shit up on the fly, and wouldn't think he knows more about how the law works than judges and other professionals. But anyway, but Donald Trump did something else. He came out and he was talking about that he did, and he thinks people should cheer him for. What did he do? Again, this shows how out of touch he is with what is really going on in this country. He retiled the Lincoln bathroom in the White House. Now, the way I understand it, the tiles that were there had been down since they did a redesign in the 40s. Was it due for an update? Maybe. You can make that argument. But he comes out talking about how it's beautiful marble tile, and it could be the same exact type of marble that was used during the Lincoln administration, etc. And he thinks people are supposed to care. I'm sorry, I'm not going to cheer him for retiling the Lincoln bathroom. Again, as with his destruction of the East Wing to build this gaudy-ass ballroom that nobody besides Donald Trump wants, did he go through proper channels? I'm guessing no. Again, there are multiple historical societies that Donald Trump should have had to consult in order to make those changes. Yes, as president, does he have certain abilities to modify the executive mansion? Yes. But there are still also things they put in place to make sure that you do it in a certain way. And when you are remodeling a historical building like the White House, there are a lot of factors that you need to take into account. But look at what he did with the East Wing. Didn't seem to give two shits about how doing it with any sort of preservation in mind or worrying about environmental factors or any of it. He just took a backhoe to it and took it out. So what did they do to the Lincoln bathroom? How did it work? How did they get to where they are? I don't know. Those answers may come out in time after he's gone, when there's congressional hearings about all of this. But he really thought people would be cheering for him for redoing the Lincoln bathroom. It's not that big of a deal right now. People don't care. It's another distraction. He's distracting away from the fact that the government shutdown is now set, with Congress not coming back till Monday, to go at least 34 days, 1 day short of the prior record held by Donald Trump himself. And if they don't open the government up Monday specifically, it goes into Tuesday and ties the record, and then every day past, it is setting a new record. Now, Donald Trump's all for setting records, but this is one he doesn't want because it makes him look bad. So he's distracting away from it. Look at what I did to the Lincoln bathroom. Oh, you guys were mad about me tearing down the East Wing. Well, you'll be happy that I did this tile project. Oh, you're mad that the economy's going bad. Well, again, cheer me. Look at what I did over here. This is typical Donald Trump. This is typical narcissist. When they're backed into a corner and things aren't going their way, and they can't get away from something, they try to distract, deflect. And none of his other deflections have been working. This is literally throwing anything at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's a distraction because he's not succeeding anywhere. And then you have the fact of his cognitive decline and everything else. He's just doing these things. And I don't even know why he thought that we would be excited about that with everything else going bad in this country. But that's how damaged his brain is right now. Now, I've been talking a lot about these judges and their ruling about how they are telling Donald Trump he must release the emergency funds to fund food stamps. All right. Now, with that, one of the things you're going to see MAGAs in the comments come out and try to say, they're going to try to say, well, Congress has the power of the purse. not these judges. And while they're right, and they are correct, that Congress has the power of the purse, the judges are not telling Donald Trump, they are not telling the Treasury, and they are not telling Congress, you must you must appropriate money to be here. What they are saying is, by the laws you passed a bill that was signed into law creating this fund that is to be used in these situations. The money's there, and it says when this happens, use this money. The court's just saying, do it. You have the authority, you have the appropriations, and the damage that could be done by not doing it is greater than whatever you seem to think you're doing by not releasing the funds. This is not about rogue judges or radical left judges or whatever the MAGAs want to try to make you believe. It's not. The judges are not going out on their own and telling Congress how to spend money. This is money Congress already approved. This is spending Congress already approved. It's done. They just need to use the money to fund food stamps for people for this month. Now, ultimately, do I think by the end of this month, do we have some kind of a resolution to this government shutdown? And is December's food stamp payment going to be there? Yes. One of the things that wouldn't surprise me is if they end up going ahead and once Democrats get Republicans negotiating, which probably happens after Tuesday, after it goes into the longest shutdown territory, after we have those elections and the Republicans get blown away and surprised and, of course, embarrassed, I think they start to negotiate. And when they do, I think that's when Democrats say, okay, well, while we're doing this, since you fucked around with the food stamp program and people couldn't eat during this shutdown, how about we kick in some extra money into the food stamp program and delay those cuts for a while? And once the negotiations happen, it wouldn't surprise me. Now, Republicans are going to try to spin this, of course, like they always do. And of course, some of the Republicans spin about what this shutdown fight is over is nothing but bullshit. We've talked about it before. They are trying to claim that the Democrats want $1 trillion to spend some are trying to say it's a slush fund. It's not. This money goes into Medicaid. And there are a lot of places that use Medicaid. There are a lot of people on Medicaid and a lot of people in red states that are on Medicaid and they don't even know it. How don't they know it? Because it's called something different. I think here in Iowa, I keep meaning to look it up, but I think it's called Hawkeye Care. In Tennessee, I know it's TennCare. I know in California, I think it's CalCare. I think one of the other states, it's something health or something like that. The whole thing is every state has a different name for it, but most of them do not call it Medicaid or Medicare. They don't. They call it something else. So you have people on here in Iowa, for example, that might be on Hawkeye Care or Hawkeye Health, whatever it is. And then when they go, oh, the Medicaid is getting cut, they go, well, I'm fine because I'm not on Medicaid. Never once realizing they're the same thing. And when you bring it up to them, I have had these conversations. Some of them will tell you you're dumb. And they try to convince you that you are the one that is completely wrong. Because they don't want to grasp the fact that everything they've been told about Medicaid was wrong. Now, the other part of it is for the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And those subsidies expire at the end of the year. People's health care, there's already sticker shock. It's expensive. But remember, this is not as good as what we could have had. They wanted to put in the government single payer option, where effectively you would buy in to Medicaid or Medicare, depending on which way you wanted to look at it. But you would buy into government health plan. basically. And it would have forced insurance companies, one, to be a lot more competitive because they would be competing with the federal government. And then two, the more people that did it, the less need for private insurance there would be. And insurance companies didn't like it. Now, what we got in the Affordable Care Act is the best we could get, in part because of the filibuster. Republicans used the filibuster to block Democratic attempts to get the Affordable Care Act passed the way they wanted. It came highly modified afterward. And what we have now is the best we could get through the Republicans at the time. And ever since it passed, Republicans have been doing nothing but trying to get it to fail and trying to get it replaced with no plan to replace it. Remember, during Donald Trump's first term, all he said was it was always 2 weeks away. He had his health care plan. It was going to be the best health care plan ever, but it was 2 weeks away for his entire 4-year term. Then he debated Kamala Harris during the 2024 election cycle when she asked him point blank, what's your health care plan? Or I guess the moderator asked him point blank, what's your health care plan? He came up with concepts of a plan. That what the fuck does that even mean other than I've got nothing and I'm grasping at straws? Now, when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, does it need fixed? Yes. But letting it fail, like Republicans want to do, with no plan to replace it, is not the answer. There were so many problems before the Affordable Care Act that a lot of people don't remember. If you had any sort of major medical condition, they were able, even on employer-sponsored plans, to deny you and say, pre-existing condition, we're not covering that. So you had people that were stuck in dead-end jobs where they didn't want to be there, but they felt that they didn't have much of a choice because they had to have their insurance. They had to have access to that insurance plan, or, their diabetes or whatever their diagnosis was not going to get treated. When kids turned 18, they were not able to stay on their parents' plan until, like now, they can stay till they're 26, I believe, which covers students who go off to college. It covers some students who just are not able to get a good paying job out of high school in a place that has benefits. Now, some places I have worked over the years, one of the companies I worked for, they started to just not give anybody benefits. You had to fight to get a benefited employee. And what they would do is, oh, well, we lost a benefited employee, this person retired, quit, whatever the case may be. Oh, well, we'll just hire 2 part-timers to cover it. Offer no benefits. And that became kind of the standard thing for quite a while. Now I'm hearing from people who still work there that is starting to change, and they're going back to offering benefits again because they're realizing they're losing a lot of good employees. But there for a while, that was the model. And if you have some kind of a health condition, you got stuck staying in a job you didn't want to be in because you couldn't move your health insurance, because you risked not being able to get your problems covered in the new job. There were so many things that the Affordable Care Act fixed that there is basically almost a generation of people at this point who do not know what it was like to live before the Affordable Care Act. And does it need fixing? Sure. But fixing doesn't mean scrapping. We need to fix it. And when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are even saying, hey, we got to do something, healthcare is getting out of control again, it's a sign that they need to do something to fix it. So we'll have to see how this weekend plays out when it comes to food stamp payments, etc. I do not know if, as of when I'm recording this, what is going to happen, if the food stamp money is going to be released. And that's another thing with food stamps I want to touch on real quick. I've talked about it in several previous podcasts, but there is a section, again, of people who don't know how food stamps work. It's on a card. They haven't used paper food stamps in over 2 decades. And they do that so it's not as embarrassing to the customer who is shopping. So if you see videos from MAGA creators saying, well, I'm out doing my shopping, and the person on the food stamps comes rolling by with this and this and this and this in their cart, guarantee you they have no idea if they're on food stamps or not. They have no clue unless they happen to be standing right behind that particular person in the grocery aisle and that person said something about paying with their food stamp card. Because it looks like a debit card. You would never know. Never know. Unless you happen to notice that, like I know here in Iowa, you are able to ring up your food and non-food items together, and the food stamp card only pays for food items. Anything that was not covered you would have a remaining balance. Maybe that's how some of these people know, but even then, they're just looking at a group of people, and it wouldn't surprise me if we find out that a big chunk of the people complaining about other people on food stamps are looking at minority races and saying, yeah, they're on food stamps, and just based on their look and saying, well, look at what's in their cart. They're buying this and this and this and this. Got to be on the food stamps because they're eating better than me. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just buying better food than you, and they can afford better. Ever thought of that? Oh no, of course they didn't. Um, the whole thing is you don't know what somebody's paying with because it's on a card. It's not paper food stamps anymore. Those went out 2 decades ago. In part, like I said, so you can't tell who's on the food stamps, who's not. And it makes it just that much easier for the stores. The stores get their money immediately. They don't have to deal with any redemption process like there used to be. And there were so many rules about how you could redeem and what you could redeem and when you could redeem, etc. And now that it's all on a card, they get their money immediately. And that's that. It's done. The other thing is, and I've seen some creators on the right say, well, their grocery prices are going to go down because people are not on food stamps. I think the reverse is going to be true. Grocery stores are going to suffer. They make a lot of money on people on food stamps. They do. And they're going to suffer in part because those people aren't going to be able to come in until that money comes back. Now, if it's short term, nothing's going to happen. If this continues and it goes long term, and I'm talking months, grocery stores aren't going to want to continue losing money. So one of the things they would have to do is they would probably end up raising prices again to make back the profit on the few people that are still shopping that aren't using the food stamps. And I say few, but you know what I mean. That they would be saying, okay, well, everybody else, since we're not making money on those other people anymore, we are going to have to raise prices. Now, they wouldn't say that specifically. You're just not going to notice the prices start to go up. Maybe the deals aren't nearly as good, something like that. But it is not a discount card that gets you everything that you bought or everything you wanted for food for free. If it was, no store would ever accept it. Lastly, the last little thing I want to touch on is regarding today being November 1st. I've been hearing some creators trying to spread this misinformation that Walmart, Target, and other places have said that they would shut their stores down and go to delivery and online purchase only. I haven't actually seen anything out there in the media saying that is real. I think that is fear mongering, and it is in part in response to the fear mongering is by people saying, "Hey, well, if they can't afford to eat," some people have said, "Well, then I'm going to take what I need." And I encourage people to not do that. Do not go out and just take what you need. I know it's desperate, etc., but you do not need to get caught. You do not need a criminal record from doing any of that. It is not worth it. In places like Walmart, they do. Well, you may think you got away with it or you pulled a fast one or whatever, but they're tracking. They know. and they will go after you. You do not need a criminal record. Hopefully you can find other resources if you need it to be able to have access to food. And I know food banks are tough right now because they're expecting higher than normal demand. I've heard some around here are limiting their supply. Um, they're not being as generous, etc., because they're expecting a greater usage, more need, and that's entirely possible. But try the other options and see what you can do there. Do not go ahead and just take what you need. But I also don't believe that there is any truth to Walmart or Target or any of the other stores just saying, yeah, we're going to close our doors and go to online only, because that just seems against their normal policy, because they make more money on people showing up, wandering that store for hours and buying a whole bunch of stuff they didn't plan on. If you are ordering online and online only, you're only going to get the 6, 8 items, 10 items, whatever it was you were planning on. You're not going to go and decide, oh, well, I want to look at clothes today. I want to look at this. I want to look at that. I don't see them doing it. So, don't take too much stock into the fear mongering of others. But that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. Hopefully tomorrow I will have a better idea of what these court rulings mean, if there was any clarification issued today. And maybe we'll also know what this means for the future of SNAP benefits this month. If they go out maybe on Sunday, maybe they get delayed till Monday. We'll have to see. Hopefully I have more answers for you tomorrow. I want to thank you for taking the time to, listen today. And I hope you have a great day. I'll be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.